Lincoln, what?
The letter from Abraham Lincoln.
President Abraham Lincoln?
Yes. Weren't you pen pal?
With the president.
I'm sorry, I heard that somebody in your party had a letter from Abraham Lincoln. I assumed it was you.
Not him. Black fella in the stable.
The nigger? In the stable has a letter from Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah.
The nigger in the stable has a letter from Abraham Lincoln.
You have just crossed over into the Twilight Zone. Tawada Hawah. Thank you, Great Spirit, for this opportunity. Much love and respect to everyone tuned in at this moment. Thank you for taking the time once again to watch this presentation. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys like this very revealing part about the person known as Abraham Lincoln. You know, little by little, the layers of lies are being exposed. We now know history is not as was taught to us, you know, after the 1900s. As we saw, Benjamin Franklin, you know, was an indentured servant runaway in previous video, as well as George Washington having European indentured servants and not African slaves. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you Abraham Lincoln was also an indentured servant runaway at one point of his life. But I will also show you one very big important thing about him that they conveniently left out of our school textbooks. Before we begin, I just want to say, let's be logical and scholarly, not personal. I'm going to start with this book. It's called A Self-Made Man, The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, 1809 to 1849 by Sidney Blumenthal. And it says here in the prologue, the slave. I used to be a slave. The first time Abraham Lincoln spoke openly about his origins was the year he assumed his new identity as a Republican. Until then, he had been remarkably reticent about the facts of his personal life. He was one of the best known political figures in Illinois. Yet he kept an essential part of himself mysterious. All right, now he's a mystery, right? By 1856, he had been a professional politician on public view for 24 years, more than half his lifetime a stalwart member of the Whig Party, and it was as a Whig that he had climbed rapidly in its ranks. So he was in the Whig Party? Why was he in the Whig Party? Further down in the book on page 3, it said it was at one of those campaign events that the man who had been extraordinarily reluctant about discussing his past, sensitive about his social inferiority, blurted out a startling confession. I used to be a slave, said Lincoln. He did not explain what prompted him to make this incredible statement, why he branded himself as belonging to the most oppressed, stigmatized, and untouchable caste. For worse than being accused of being an abolitionist, Illinois, while a free state, had a draconian black code. Why would Lincoln announce that he was a former slave? The bare facts he did not disclose to his audience were these. Until he was 21 years old, Lincoln's father, his father had rented him out to neighbors, in rural Indiana at a price of 10 to 31 cents a day. Okay, his dad was hustling, his son around, like selling his services, labor. The father collected the son's wages. Lincoln was in effect an indentured servant. Oh, there we go. A slave. An indentured servant, a slave. All right, we've been learning about indentured servitude, right? The true beginning of slavery, so-called slavery. He regarded his semi-literate father as domineering and himself without rights. All right, so his father was treating him almost like a slave. Why would a father do that to a son? Now, we got the same story with supposedly Benjamin Franklin's dad indenturing his son to his older brother, who turns out to be his stepbrother. So what I'm trying to say is, are these people really their kids, or these indentured servants they had since kids, right? That they bought or they got from the mother who was an indentured servant. All right, well, we'll see. We got to dig on that, but it says, you know, he was treating him like a slave here, without rights. Thomas Lincoln, who had led a harsh and unfair life, wanted his son to learn an honest trade as a laborer, perhaps train as a carpenter like himself, considered formal education a waste of time, and sought to suppress any larger ambition as useless dreaminess. So his dad, Thomas Lincoln, was also, you know, seems to have been a laborer all his life, right? A hard life, a harsh life. He wasn't from royalty or anything like that. It was only when the self-made man finally identified himself as a Republican that he felt free to reveal himself as a slave. All right, and then Lincoln completed his story. And now I am so free that they let me practice law. I'm even a lawyer, and I'm what? What does he mean by all this? Why wouldn't he be able to practice law? Lincoln's wry humor drove home his point about his getaway, but Max the Scar calling himself a slave was not a slip of the tongue, hyperbole, or metaphor. It was not just another of his funny stories. Though he made it into a joke, he truly considered himself to have been held in bondage and escaped. All right, Lincoln literally, if ever, talked about his feelings, even to his closest friends who tried to discern the signs. He hid his depths behind his simplicity. His authenticity was not deceptive, but a veneer nonetheless. He was simple in his dress, manners, simple in his approach and his presence, recalled Herndon. Though this be true, he was a man of quite infinite silences, and was thoroughly and deeply secretive, uncommunicative, and close-minded as to his plans, wishes, hopes, and fears. I venture to say that he never wholly opened himself to mortal creature. It was no wonder his captivity as a boy he felt was humiliating. All right, so his captivity as a boy, he was an indentured servant all his young youth, was humiliating and degrading. Imprisonment in a world of neglect, poverty, fleckleness, and ignorance. It was at the root of his fierce desire to rise. If he was angry with his father, he also knew that his father had been reduced to a dirt farmer and compelled to flee Kentucky to escape from slavery. Boom. So his dad was also a runaway. His dad, Thomas Lincoln, was also a runaway at some point. He was escaping from slavery, it says here. Slave states are places for poor white people to remove from. This is where all these runaway, indentured, poor white people were going to. Not to remove to, Lincoln said in 1854 in opposition to Douglas' Nebraska Act. New free states are the places for poor people to go to and better their condition. Lincoln had been oppressed by a man who himself was oppressed. By crossing the Ohio River into Indiana, his father had made his own escape. Lincoln was a fugitive son and a fugitive himself, all right? Lincoln was a indentured servant, and he had escaped at one point in his life. He was a runaway, and look what he did as well, just like Benjamin Franklin, right? Even more startling from Lincoln's self-description as chattel was his subsequent self-identification as a particular kind of slave, a fugitive slave, a runaway. All right, a runaway. He himself is saying that in one of only 2 brief autobiographical interviews he ever granted, this one intended for circulation in support of his Senate candidacy in 1858 and given to his friend Jesse W. Fell, an Illinois lawyer and businessman who had advised him to challenge Douglas to debate Lincoln, offered this physical description of himself. If any personal description of me is thought desirable, it may be said I am in height 6 feet 4 inches, nearly lean in flesh, weighing on average 180 pounds, dark complexion, again, dark complexion. Remember, this guy is letting us know that this is what Lincoln said about himself. All right, he said he is dark complexion with coarse black hair and gray eyes, no other marks or brands recollected. Now, we're gonna verify that in this same video. You're saying, oh, that's just this person, man. I can't believe the white man, right? All right, we're gonna verify this. If Lincoln said that himself, we're gonna verify that. Many, perhaps even at that time, might have missed Lincoln's allusion at the end of his seemingly bland self-portrayal, though the politician and lawyer who had learned to wield words with surgical precision certainly knew his own intent and had undoubtedly ruminated on it. No other marks or brands recollected. was not another of his amusing jokes, but the exact language slave owners used to describe runaway slaves in newspaper ads. All right? So look, this guy is pointing out what he said at the end, right? About him saying no other marks or brands recollected, but he's not talking about that he called himself dark complexion, right? He's leaving that out, right? But that's very interesting as well, you see. So we know the slave ads actually did have that. I've shown some of them, and they do say things like that. No other marks or brands recollected, meaning the owner who puts out the ad saying, well, he doesn't have a scar, he doesn't have a birthmark, so he would put it there. So that's what he was saying. So it's the exact language slave owners used to describe runaway slaves in the newspaper ads. Lincoln had therefore identified himself not only as one of the fugitives, but also mocked their owners. This was one more than sympathetic projection. He believed he had his own fugitive experience and emancipated himself. He was an oppressed and stunted boy who achieved his freedom. If with his disadvantages he could do it, it could be done. When he became a Republican and identified himself as a slave, he had begun emerging as the Abraham Lincoln identifiable in history. 4 years later, at the Illinois State Republican Convention nominating him for president, he would be given another identity, the rail splitter, the legendary axe-wielding laborer, common man of the people. All right, so this is the story they told us, that he was a laborer. He did the American dream, right? He worked hard and he accomplished the American dream and he became a president. And they gave us this, image of him being a rail splitter, a legendary axe-wielding laborer. But he was really an indentured servant runaway, a slave. That's what he was. Common man of the people, yeah. Establishing one of the most enduring icons in American history. They created what? An icon. Iconoclasm, icon. Though to the private Lincoln, who chuckled at the contrived image making by party handlers, it was a picture of himself from the time when he thought of himself as a slave. Like other runaways, he had remade his identity and never took it for granted. All right? Now, what does that mean? Is that being very subliminal? He remade his image? What does that mean? Why is it saying he's dark complexion here? Why doesn't the images that we see in history about Abraham Lincoln that they show us, why are we seeing a white, pale-faced man? This doesn't look like a dark complexion man. Does this look like a dark complexion man to you? Huh? So they're saying that even himself, saying that he contrived and chuckled about the image making. They were making images of him, right? He remade his identity and he never took it for granted. Is this subliminal? We're in this article right here written. This chapter is basically about Lincoln also, describing himself as a slave. Just want to get you another source. It says here, I used to be a slave, boyhood and adolescence in Indiana, 1816-1830. This quasi-slavery as a rented laborer. As well as a bachelor, Lincoln was also busy. He worked not only on his father's farm, but also for neighbors to whom his father sold him, indentured him. Around 1825, Thomas Lincoln found himself in greater financial trouble than usual when a friend defaulted on a loan that Thomas had endorsed. To pay off that note, Thomas removed his son from school and hired him out to neighbors, including Thomas Turnham, Wesley Hall, William Wood, Silas Richardson, Joseph Gentry, John Dutton, John Jones, and Joshua Crawford. They all had him as indentured servant. For the next few years, Lincoln was a virtual slave. He was what? A virtual what? Slave. He was a slave, toiling as a butcher, ferry operator, riverman, store clerk, farmhand, woodchopper, distiller, and sawyer, earning anywhere from 10 cents to 31 cents a day. All right, and here's the sources. Meager wages he handed over to Thomas, in compliance with the law stipulating that children were the property of their father, and that any money they earned belonged to him. Locked in this bondage, Abraham felt as if he were a chattel on a southern plantation. I used to be a slave, he declared in 1856. Years earlier, describing his joy at escaping from engagement to be married, he said, through life I have been in no bondage, real or imaginary, from the thraldom of which I so much desired to be free. Thanks to his father, he knew what it was like to be in bondage. This painful experience led him to identify with the slaves and to denounce the South's peculiar institution, even when it was politically risky to do so. So before we continue on the video, a little bit of history of Abraham Lincoln and his, genealogy supposedly. This is, I got it from the Library of Congress. It says here, Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States of America, an American lawyer, was born in part of Hardin County, Kentucky, which is now included in LaRue County, February 12, 1809. His ancestors, who were Quakers, all right? So remember, he said he was dark complexion and that he was a slave and a servant, indentured servant. So his ancestors were Quakers from Berks County, Pennsylvania, who went to Rockingham County, Virginia. And from there, his grandfather, Abraham, removed with his family to Kentucky about 1782 and was killed by Indians in 1784. So his grandfather was killed by Indians. Thomas Lincoln, so that's his dad, Thomas Lincoln, right, who indentured him, right? The father of Abraham was born in Virginia and in 1806 married Nancy Hanks, also a Virginian. So that was his mom, Nancy Hanks, as they say. In 1816, he removed with his family to what is now Spencer County, Indiana, where Abraham, being large for his age, very large, he was very tall, they say, was put to work. He was put to work right away, right? Remember, with an axe to assist in clearing away the forest, and for the next 10 years was mostly occupied in hard labor on his father's farm. All right, hard labor. They ain't saying why. He was an indentured servant for his dad. In this book, it says Abraham Lincoln and His Ancestors by Ida Minerva Tarbell. And it says here, in the footsteps of the Lincolns, it says the story of Abraham Lincoln begins in Hingham, Massachusetts, it says, supposedly, in the year 1637. We're going to see a different story, though, when the first of his family line came to the Puritan colony of Boston Bay. This was his great-great-great-great-grandfather, Samuel, by the name of a boy, but 17 or 18 of that time. Such a boy as we would send to high school or college in these days. Young as Samuel Lincoln was, he was not without some experience of life. He had sat on Bachel's bench in 17th century schoolroom in Hingham, England, and received his share of its narrow but thorough teaching. And because he was to earn his living, and weaving was the natural trade for a boy in Norfolk County, England, at that time he had been apprenticed. I remember, apprentice and indenture. This was the normal in England. They did that to all the children. So he was used to being an apprentice or indentured. This was his family was coming from this. If this is his great-great-great-grandfather, right? To a man by the name of Francis Laws, living in Norwich, not many miles from Hingham. It says, when you were apprentice in those days, you left your family and became a member of your master's family. You had, so, okay, big, very important there. This is what I was saying earlier. It says, when you were apprentice in those days, you left your family and you became member of your master's family. So is this what happened to Benjamin Franklin? Was that really his dad pimping him and selling him out? And is this Abraham Lincoln? Is this really his dad? Or is he just apprentice to this person? Is he just apprentice? Is this just an indentured servant he has? This is something I'm going to dig into, all right? But this is very important. They're telling you right here, when you were apprentice in those days, you left your family and became a member of your master's family. You had more to do than to learn to weave. In fact, you was what was called an indentured servant. All right, you're an indentured servant. Apprentice, same thing. Indentured servant. They try to make it sound nice when they say apprenticed. All right, but it's indentured servant. Mr. Laws was under contract to teach Samuel the trade and to give him his keep in small, probably a very small weekly or monthly sum. Samuel in turn was obliged to obey Mr. Laws, and that meant not only that he must learn to weave, but he must wait on the family. If the family was ungenerous and domineering, it is easy to see that the apprentices had a bad time. Indeed, they had so bad of a time that only a few years after Samuel left England, there was what was called the Apprentices' Revolt. Strike, we should probably say today. It produced the state of things which led Daniel Defoe to complain. All right, so they're saying these apprentices, these indentured servants who had a revolt. All right. So again, this ancestor of Abraham Lincoln in England was already an indentured servant. There, he's coming from a line of servants. Again, just to correlate, I'm in this book, The Ancestry of Abraham Lincoln by Henry Lee and J.R. Hutchinson. And we're in chapter 1, The Ancestry of Abraham Lincoln. Chapter 1, The Immigrant, His Home and Parentage. It says, among those who in the later 30s of the 17th century were overtaken by the swiftly rising tide of immigration was a Norfolk youth named Samuel Lincoln, born in Hingham. He had been early apprenticed to one Francis Laws of Norwich, and it was in his capacity of indentured servant to this man, he was a servant, a weaver by trade, that he embarked for America, together with his master and his master's family, either at the port of Ipswich in the adjoining county of the Suffolk, or at Yarmouth in his native county. On the 8th day of April 1637, the passage was no Mauritanian one. For 2 months and 12 days, the vessel breasted the Atlantic, and it was not until the 20th of June that Laws and his party disembarked at Boston, first set foot on the soil of their adoption. Our boy pioneer was then how old? In his ancestry, if it is his ancestor, Samuel Lincoln, he was an indentured servant. So you see a line of indentured servants already.
That's
so
right.
I wanted to record this. I thought it was very interesting. And it says here, Abraham Lincoln or Linkhorn. All right. It says this is an argument read by L.P. Henninghausen at the yearly meeting of the society in 1901. So was it a blunder of the clerk in the land office of Richmond, Virginia in 1780 when he issued the land warrant to the grandfather of Abraham Lincoln by the name of Abraham Linkhorn, as alleged by his biographers? All right, so what this person is talking about is that Abraham's grandfather is referred to in documents, in all documents, as not Lincoln with the C-O-L-N, but Linkhorn, as you see here. And they said, they wrote it off in history saying, well, that was blunders by the clerks and all these people who didn't know how to spell or whatever. And so he's going to show you something in this article, though. It says, the only historical information we have of the ancestry of Abraham Lincoln is his own saying that his ancestors originally came from Berks County, Pennsylvania, all right, and moved from there to Rockingham County, Virginia. That his grandfather Abraham, about 1780, with his wife and children, left Rockingham County to establish himself in Jefferson County on a farm about 20 miles east of the present city of Louisville. This grandfather was a man of some means, for we find that before he left for Jefferson County, he obtained from the land office of the Commonwealth of Virginia, in payment of the sum of 160 pounds current money, the land office treasury warrant number 334, bearing the date the 4th day of March 1780, and directed to the principal surveyor of any county within the Commonwealth of Virginia to survey and lay off in one or more surveys for Abraham Linkhorn, his heirs, and assigns the quantity of 400 acres of land due to said Linkhorn. All right, so he's saying there's a document from 1780 that says he named himself Linkhorn. Here is the document. Says, I hereof a facsimile of said land warrant. This shall be your warrants, survey, and lay off and more, and says Abraham Linkhorn. You see his signature? Kentucky was at that time a part of Virginia, still inhabited by Indians, who resisted the white invader by every craft of cruel warfare known to them. The reports of the wonderfully fertile soil and salubrious climate of the territory brought home by adventurous hunters from the western frontier settlements of North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland were the cause of the immigration of many from these parts of the county to Kentucky. So your ancestors here, you know, making sure they're fighting, they're trying to keep their land. Western Maryland, West Virginia, and Western North Carolina are reported to be the first and principally settled by Germans from Berks, Lancaster, Bucks, and other counties of Pennsylvania. So now listen to this. So remember, he's saying that their family came from that place in Virginia, who had actually been there from Pennsylvania, right, in the Berks, and these were Germans. All right, Germans. Linkhorn. Abraham Linkhorn must have taken his time to select his future homestead, for it was 5 years later, on May 7th, 1785, that he received his certificate of the survey of 400 acres of land in Jefferson County by virtue of said treasury warrant number 334 on the Fork of Floyd's Fork. All right, so blah, blah, blah. And so here's the written letter. It says, you will see from this that the name Abraham Linkhorn appears in the body of the warrant, and it is also signed by him Linkhorn, whilst two officials who had to affix their signatures to the warrant named Ananiah Lincoln and Joshua Lincoln signed as such and not as Linkhorn. In the next year, 1786, this Abraham Linkhorn was killed by the Indians. His son Thomas, all right, this is Abraham Lincoln's dad, Thomas, the father of President Lincoln, was then only 7 years of age. He was allowed to grow up without any schooling. He was allowed to grow up with no schooling. Remember, he was an escaped runaway indentured servant to his dad. So he grew up without schooling. That would make sense if he's an indentured servant. He never learned to write, and we are not informed whether he could read. He was known as Lincoln. So maybe his dad, since he didn't know how to write or read, he was writing it wrong. So during the lifetime of President Lincoln, no one ever appeared to claim or was recognized by him as a relative on his father's side of his ancestors. All right, so we're going to get into how mysterious, and they don't really know. It's hard for them to really trace his genealogy. It's like a mystery. So it is only since the death of the great man that the attempt is made to connect him with a certain Mordecai Lincoln, gentleman of Massachusetts, who removed to Monmouth, New Jersey. So you see, they try to link him to a wealthy noble guy, right? Where he is said to have died in 1735. Whenever President Lincoln was asked about the genealogy of his family, he loved to quote the line from Gray's Elegy on a Country Churchyard: "You must look into the short and simple annals of the poor." So he himself is saying he's poor. Continuing on here, says the laborious efforts of the biographers of the president to make him a descendant of a rich gentleman from New England who died only 73 years before Lincoln was born, and the absurd assertion that the name and signature of his grandfather was by an ignorant or mischievous clerk, changed from the well-known historic English Lincoln to the German-sounding Linkhorn, especially when two attestant officials named Lincoln also affixed their signatures, belongs to nursery tales and not to historical researches. So he's saying that in this same letter, he signed Linkhorn, and there's actually people who signed Lincoln the correct way. So why would the clerk sign it wrong, right? They know what they're spelling is what he's saying. The fact that the warrant and certificate are the only new muniments of title to the 400-acre homestead of Abraham Lincoln is conclusive, and this is the only existing title of his grandfather. And they're saying it's a mistake, without the clearest proof to the contrary that Lincoln, and not the more familiar and common Lincoln, the name of an old English city and county, was the family name of the grandfather of the president, and was changed like an untold number of German names by and during the life of his illiterate son Thomas. It says Lincoln said his ancestors came from Berks County, Pennsylvania, and emigrated from there to Rockingham County, Virginia. Now listen to this. It says we know that the Berks County was settled by Germans at the end of the 17th and first decades of the 18th century, and the German language is to this day the common vernacular of the people of the county. Further, we know that in the third decade of the 18th century, an emigration set out from Berks and adjoining counties to Rockingham County, Virginia, and that many of these German immigrants were German Quakers or non-combatants, Mennonites. All right, we're going to get into all these people in the future, in my next video, dealing with indentured servitude. Mennonites, all these people are Quakers. Protestants, basically a type of Protestant the Quakers were. All right, and these were mostly indentured servants. All right, I'm going to show you this. I've mentioned it before. I know you remember in my past video, but these are all indentured servants arriving in Pennsylvania and emigrating to Virginia. This is documented. This is historical migrations, U.S. American historical migrations of these people. Lincoln stated his ancestors were Quakers. From the church records and schoolhouses erected by these new settlers in Virginia, as well as from many family Bibles, hymns, books, certificates, letters, etc., still preserved, we know that they were not illiterate, and if Abraham Lincoln was one of them, he could write his name, and neither the land office in Richmond nor the surveyors in their certificate are guilty of clerical errors. So real quick, just to correlate, it says here, exploring diversity in Pennsylvania history. The German settlement in Pennsylvania, this is from the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, with the Balch Institute for Ethnic Studies. It says in 1683, a group of Quakers and Mennonites from the Krefeld region of the Rhineland founded the city of Germantown, the first recorded German settlement in the English colonies. Mennonites were religious dissenters who believed in adult baptism and absolute pacifism. William Penn had proselytized among Rhine Valley dissenters and invited them to settle in his colony. All right, we know historically William Penn did do that, and he did it through the indenture system, headright system. That's how he did it. We got this already. By 1710, German immigration to Pennsylvania increased significantly. German immigrants founded Skippack in 1702 and Ole and Conestoga in 1709. Most early German immigrants came from the southwest region of Germany, the area known as the Rhineland, Palatinate, Württemberg, Baden, and German Switzerland. Study those regions. Do you find Moors in those regions? I bet you will in history. Between 1727 and 1775, approximately 65,000 Germans landed in Philadelphia and settled in the region, while some German immigrants landed in other ports and moved to Pennsylvania. The largest wave of German immigration to Pennsylvania occurred during the years 1749-1754, but tapered off during the French and Indian Wars and after the American Revolution. The wars in the colonies in Europe, combined with the rise in land prices, made it difficult to attract German immigrants, especially those with families. There were many reasons why Germans left their homeland to make the treacherous journey across the Atlantic to America. Although much has been said about religious persecution, dissenters comprised a minority of German immigrants to Pennsylvania. You hear that? That was the minority. Dissenters were not the majority. This is very important. I want you to pay attention to what I'm about to say. So during our history, when they was teaching us about these immigrants, they never wanted to teach us that they were indentured servants or like slaves, that they went through a middle passage and were treated like chattel property. So they would use this whole religious dissenters, religious persecutions and all this. They were seeking religious freedom, made them look like victims, and that they were actually on their own coming over here and happily. But in reality, as it's letting us know here, dissenters, or these kind of people who were religiously persecuted, were a minority that were immigrants from Spain, and most were affiliated with Lutheran and Reformed churches, conservative religious groups. They left primarily because of the devastation of the 30-Year War and the subsequent wars between the German principalities and France. For these immigrants, the colony of Pennsylvania must have seemed like a land of opportunity, despite accounts written by travelers such as Gottlieb Mittelberger, who warned his fellow countrymen of the dangers they would encounter. We got a book of him already. Instead, most chose to believe letters from relatives such as Christopher Saar, who wrote of the generous land grants and political and religious freedom in the colony of Pennsylvania. It says German immigrants tended to come in family units and were often tradesmen or artisans. One historian described a typical German immigrant as a poor farmer or artisan who arrived around 1750 with a wife and 2 children. They were most likely in debt for passage across the Atlantic, but had family or friends already settled in America. They were affiliated with the Lutheran or Reformed Church, but only loosely committed to an organized religion. Records indicate that they became prosperous members of the community. However, many were too poor to pay for the transatlantic passage. We're talking about the German transatlantic slave trade. Yes, not the African slave trade, transatlantic. We're talking about the German transatlantic slave trade. So as many as 1/2 of 2/3 of German immigrants came to Pennsylvania as what? Indentured servants. Again, the German transatlantic slave trade. Indentured servants, or redemptioneers, as Germans called them. Immigrants would pay back the ship owner for their passage and expenses by contracting their services to an employer for a set number of years, usually between 2 to 7 years, when their term of service was completed. Their indebtedness was redeemed. Conditions varied for indentured servants, and families could be separated for years. By the time of the Revolutionary War, there were approximately 65,000 to 75,000 ethnically German residents in Pennsylvania. We're talking about, you see that? Now, were all these people white Germans? That's the hijack you gotta dodge. We can't go and generalize. We gotta go case by case, individual. A lot of these were so-called black Germans, Swarty Germans. So we see that, Abraham Lincoln, first of all, his genealogical history is questionable. It's debatable. It makes more sense what the person was just writing about Lincoln and, this whole indentured servitude. We know his dad was an escapee. So we know that his grandfather, being a Lincoln, was most likely at some point an indentured servant who got his freedom and got land and all that. He was granted land, you see. That was probably when he got his indenture. When he was granted that land, he signed Abraham Lincoln. So he comes from a poor, very poor family. Lincoln, remember, we're not going to go away from this. He described himself as dark complexion. Dark complexion. We're in the Des Moines News newspaper. This is from Des Moines, Iowa, February 12, 1909. It says here, Honest Abe. This is an article. This is the image they got here. We're gonna. This image is questionable. You'll see why. So it says here, Name of Lincoln on every tongue, memory revered. It says President Roosevelt lays cornerstone of Memorial Hall at Hodgenville. And it says here, we have met here to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the birth of one of the two greatest Americans, of one of the 2 or 3 greatest men of the 19th century, of one of the greatest men in the world's history. This rail splitter, remember, they made him a rail splitter to make him look not so bad, but he was an indentured servant slave. This boy who passed his ungainly youth in the dire poverty of the poorest, in the dire poverty of the poorest. He was very, very poor. Of the frontier folk whose rise was by weary and painful labor. Remember, he worked all his life. He was an indentured servant. Lived to lend, to lead. Lived to lead his people. Lived to lead his people. Who's his people? They're talking about Abraham Lincoln. Through the burning flames of a struggle from which the nation emerged. So he led his people, right? And now Abraham Lincoln is the one who supposedly freed all the slaves, and all the slaves are supposed to be black, right? So what are they talking about? They talking about that? Is that his people? Now remember, he told everybody, or according to that guy, we're going to verify that he is dark complexion, right? And what do they mean here by leading his people through the struggle? All right, subliminal words here, they're letting you know, though, he was of the dire poverty of the poorest. So we're going to investigate this Abraham Lincoln. We're going to get into it, all right? So now I want to go into this book real quick. We're going to get into his dad a little bit, Thomas Lincoln. Now it says here, the book is Life of Abraham Lincoln, being a biography of his life from his birth to his assassination, also a record of his ancestors, and a collection of anecdotes attributed to Lincoln. He is the gentlest memory of our nation, it says here, by Clifton M. Nichols, and this is from 1899. All right, so it says here in chapter 2, let me just zoom in. It says here in 1782, Abraham Lincoln, grandfather of President Lincoln. Now remember, we just read that it was he signed his document as Lincoln. All right, and he might be a German, an indentured servant German. All right, it says here, grandfather of President Lincoln was his wife and 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, left Rockingham County, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley with a party of immigrants. Here we go. So these are the Germans again. They kept it moving, right? From Rockingham County, and a party of immigrants for Kentucky. They all rode horseback and followed Daniel Boone. Daniel Boone, we're going to read about, investigate too. They suffered all the hardships and mishaps usual to such a trip. They slept on the ground, were delayed by floods and harassed by Indians. Finally, they reached Beargrass Fort in Mercer County, about 50 miles from what is now the city of Louisville. A farm of 500 acres on Lincoln Creek was selected. Here in the dense forest, he cleared a few acres of ground, built a little log cabin, and became a pioneer settler on the western frontier. So I wonder who gave him this land to clear. This is what I'm wondering, if it was okay with the local, indigenous people there. And I say that because down here it says, now, one day in the year 1784, while Abraham Lincoln was working in the clearing near his cabin, we're talking about his grandfather, right? The Lincoln, remember Abraham Lincoln, the German indentured servant who probably became free and left. You see, he was on migration. His cabin with his 3 boys. So he was working in his cabin with his 3 boys, Mordecai, 10-year-old Joshua, 8, and Thomas, 6. So his dad was 6. Thomas, his dad, Abraham Lincoln's dad. It says a bullet fired by an Indian pierced his heart. So Mordecai, startled by the shot, saw his father fall and running to the cabin, seized the loaded rifle, rushed to one of the loopholes, cut through the logs of the cabin, and awaited the approach of the savage. So they're calling this guy a savage. You see how this writer is calling our ancestors, right? Joshua fled for the fort to give an alarm. The Indian came up to take little Thomas Lincoln and carry him away. Suddenly, the crack of a rifle was heard, and the savage fell dead, shot by Mordecai. Such was the tragedy in the life of Mary Shipley Lincoln, the grandmother of the 16th President of the United States. All right, so it says, soon after the death of her husband, the widow moved to Washington County near the town of Springfield, where she lived until her death. No schools had yet been established, and her children grew to manhood and womanhood. Now it says here, without the opportunity of securing education, both of the girls married and spent their lives in that section of the country. Under the law entail of Kentucky, the eldest son inherited the estate of his father, and so Mordecai came into possession of his father's property. Mordecai and Joshua Lincoln remained in Washington County and became the heads of good-sized families. They were intelligent, well-to-do men and owned slaves. They had indentured servants too. Mordecai took part in the Indian Wars. He hated Indians bitterly ever after the murder of his father, and until the day of his death never lost an opportunity of shooting them down. You hear that? A most remarkable and almost inexplicable fact is that, now listen to this, we're getting to, this is Abraham Lincoln's father, all right? We're going to get a clear description of his father. If this is his supposed father, if it is his father. Either way, we're going to get a description of him. Now it says here, the most remarkable and almost inexplicable fact is that to Thomas Lincoln was reserved the honor of an illustrious paternity. All right, what does that mean? So it says a most remarkable and almost inexplicable fact. What does that mean? Is that Thomas Lincoln, his dad, was reserved in honor of an illustrious paternity? Thomas was about 5 feet 10 inches in height, weighed about 200 pounds, had dark brown eyes, dark skin, and black hair. Thomas Lincoln, again, Abraham Lincoln's dad, dark skin, and black hair. He was always poor and indolent. He was a man of great strength but slow of movement. When he really tried, he could accomplish a great deal of whatever he turned his hand, but he usually lacked the energy and perseverance necessary to make a success of his undertaking. He was a man of good intentions in all things and honest in all his dealings. He was peaceful and law-abiding, except when aroused to anger, and then he became dangerous antagonist. All right, so again, Abraham Lincoln's dad described as dark skin in this book. All right, now this book's get into his mom, Nancy Hanks. Now again, we're going to see that very little is known of her. She has a lot of different paternal origin stories. She's the son of this person, or the son of this person, or the daughter, of this person, the daughter. So they don't really know. They're hiding something to me. But let's just read a little bit of what it says here about her. It says, very little is known of Nancy Hanks, the mother of President Lincoln. It seems that she was born in Virginia in 1783, that her mother's given name was Lucy, and after she married Henry Sparrow, the child did not remain long under her stepfather's roof, but went to live with her Aunt Betsy, who had married Thomas Sparrow. They had no children of their own. Besides Nancy, they took to raise her cousin Dennis Hanks. Little Nancy became so identified with Thomas and Betsy Sparrow that a great many supposed that she was the third child. She was called Nancy Sparrow by her playmates. So was she apprenticed to all these people? Why is she moving around? Like it says here, Nancy Hanks was a beautiful girl of pleasing manners and keen intellect. She was slender and symmetrical, above the ordinary height and stature, and had the appearance of one inclined to consumption. She was a brunette. All right, so she was a brunette. What does that mean? With dark hair. All right, so I know brunette, people usually use it for hair color, right? I know that, right? And I'm Kurimeo, but that means hair color. But they're already saying her hair is dark. Why would they say she's a brown hair with dark hair? Why would she say, because brunette is brown hair, right? Why would she say, or dark hair, right? Why would they say it again? She has dark hair with dark hair. We go to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, right? And it says brunette. Brunette. What does it say? Of a dark brown color. Brunette hair, for example. Having brunette hair. Also having brunette hair. It doesn't just mean brunette hair. It also means a dark brown color. Brunette. Brown, right? Brunette. That sounds like almost like a French thing, like brunette. Right? Brown, brunette, bruin, bruin. We know bruin is dark complexion in Dutch. Bruin, brunette, brown. Right? A dark brown color. A dark brown color. His mom, again, she was a what? A dark brown color with dark hair, soft hazel eyes, and it had a high intellectual looking forehead. On page 93, chapter 12 of this book, it's talking about one of Lincoln's love affairs, right? One of his women. And it says that she is described here. Her eyes were grayish blue, her hair abundant and dark brown in color. So they're already describing her hair as dark brown in color. She was again brunette. So again, she's being described as brunette with rosy tinge in her cheeks. So they're talking about her complexion. All right, they're not talking about her hair right here. So she was a dark brown color with rosy cheeks, basically. That's one of his girlfriends, dark brown color. All right, on page 218 of this same book, and it says that right here is the Abraham Lincoln's autobiography. Now it says here, the following autobiography was written by Mr. Lincoln's own hand, at the request of J.W. Fell of Springfield, Illinois, December 20th, 1859. In the note which accompanied it, the writer says, all right, so this is the whole autobiography. You can go ahead and get all of it. He starts talking about his parents, right? What we already read, that they were Quakers from Berks County, Pennsylvania, and things like that. But more importantly, is at the end of this autobiography letter he did, which we already read somebody else tell us. Now he says right here again, and it's in this book too, it says, if any personal description of me is thought desirable, it may be said, I am in height 6 feet 4 inches, nearly lean in flesh, weighing on average 180 pounds, dark complexion. He's saying himself, dark complexion, dark complexion. What are you gonna say? Hey, Kurimeo, that means pale. Also, dark means pale too. Dark complexion is dark complexion. I don't care what anybody says. They want to show us white images of Abraham Lincoln. They want to say, oh no, he just meant he was a little dark because he's Semitic, or because he might be a little mixed, or because he's whatever they want to try to say. Dark complexion is dark complexion. It's not pale, right? With coarse black hair, dark complexion. That's himself describing himself as that, all right? Another source saying the same thing, all right? So he got dark parents, dark skin complexion parents. He's calling himself dark skin, all right? So far, he was an indentured servant. Are you following me so far, all right? His great-grandfather, if it is Samuel, he was an indentured servant. His grandfather, Abraham Lincoln, right, was actually a German. If he signed his name Lincoln, and we know that these people were indentured servants, and they settled in Pennsylvania. This book, now remember I told you, is this Thomas Lincoln really his dad? This book, there's a whole book written about it. It says the paternity of Abraham Lincoln. Was he the son of Thomas Lincoln? With a question mark. An essay on the chastity of Nancy Hanks by William E. Barton, author of The Soul of Abraham Lincoln, etc. It says here in the preface, he says, as he proceeded, however, they're talking about the author, he was surprised to find a number of intelligent collectors of Lincoln books and students of his history who believed that Abraham Lincoln was not the son of Thomas Lincoln. So he's saying that this author who wrote this book basically found many sources, many records of people debating that Thomas was his dad. He also found that while Mrs. Hitchcock has done enthusiastic work with reference to the paternity of Nancy Hanks, and several people had entered the list as champions of her chastity, no one, so far as he could learn, had compiled the various theories adverse to Thomas Lincoln's paternity of Abraham and subjected them to a critical examination. Moreover, the author found himself at length compelled to ask of himself the question, what if these reports are true? And he pursued his investigations with an open mind, and he hopes and believes, in accordance with the true spirit of historical inquiry, the author had frequent occasion. So I'm not going to read this book, but I just want to show you that they actually made a book about this, and it's very scholarly, a lot of good info. What we know about Thomas Lincoln, what we know about Nancy Lincoln, the origin and destiny of these stories. And one of the things that we already talked about was Abraham Lincoln a German? Was he a German? All right, now we're going to this book. All right, we're going to go into her mom, another source. It says the story Life of Lincoln, a biography composed of 500 true stories told by Abraham Lincoln and his friends. Again, true stories selected from all authentic sources and fitted together in order, forming his complete life history by Wayne Whipple, author of The Story of the White House and Its Home Life, The Minuteman, The Story of Plymouth Rock, etc. Memorial edition. All right, scholarly source here. And this book is from 1908. All right, so we're on page 19 of this book, and right here it talks about Nancy Hanks. Again, that's his mom. It says Lincoln's mother. It says at the time of her marriage to Thomas Lincoln, Nancy was in her 23rd year. She was above the ordinary height and stature, weighed about 130 pounds, was slender built, and had much the appearance of one inclined to consumption. Her skin was dark. Again, dark. Her dark brown eyes, gray and small. Remember, they called her brunette, dark brown, and right here they calling her, saying her skin was dark. So brunette and dark brown, brunette, dark brown, dark. All right, what are we talking about? Copper-colored tribes of America. What are we talking about? An aboriginal here. Eyes gray and small, forehead prominent, face sharp and angular, with a marked expression of melancholy which fixed itself in the memory of everyone who ever saw or knew her. All right, so again, Nancy, his mom, dark skin. We got her already as brunette, dark brown, which means dark brown. All right, that's two sources already. I'm on page 273 of the same book. And down here it says, almost from his opening words, the speaker assumed an air of superiority, stating his facts in convincingly authoritative tone and belittling his adversary's political pretensions. and generally treating him with such marked condescension that many of Lincoln's friends, watching his dark, homely, careworn face, his dark face, his dark complexion, homely, careworn face, began to fear that he had displayed more courage than wisdom in courting comparison with so brilliant a rival. All right, they're describing him as a dark-faced man. Dark face. All right, we're not done. And we're on page 331 of this same book. And again, we're going to get another source saying the same thing. It says Lincoln's own life story. And again, it's the same autobiography where he says, if any personal description of me is thought desirable, it may be said I am in height 6 feet 4 inches, nearly lean in flesh, weighing on average 180 pounds, dark complexion. Again, dark complexion. All right, so when they're saying his dark, homely face, they know what they're saying. They don't mean like a dark face, like he's looking dark, like sad or like evil. No, he's dark complexion with coarse black hair and gray eyes. That's from his own words. Yours very truly, A. Lincoln. J. W. Fell Esquire, Recollections of Abraham Lincoln, Ward and Lamon, page 9. We're on page 573 of the same book. All right, and down here it says, is this bloody war ever to end? It says, the morning after the bloody battle of the Wilderness, I saw him walk up and down the executive chamber, his long arms behind his back, his dark features, again, his dark features contracted still more with gloom. As he looked up, I thought his face the saddest one I ever had seen, he exclaimed. Why do we suffer reverses after reverses? Could we have avoided this terrible bloody war? Was it not forced upon us? Is it ever to end? All right, so they're talking about Lincoln here. Dark features. I'll continue page 579 in the same book. 579 says the president in the streets of the Capitol. And it says right here, I see very plainly Abraham Lincoln's dark brown face with the deep cut lines. The eyes always look to me with a deep Latin sadness in the expression. Again, Abraham Lincoln. Dark brown face. Dark brown face. Who is dark brown? Dark brown face. Again, look at this image. I'm telling you right now, people. Does this look like a dark brown face to you? Is this a dark complexion face to you? Is this dark features? Dark brown. All right, same book, page 618, chapter 23. Says the end of the war after the inaugural ceremonies. Says here he was in his plain 2-horse barouche and looked very much worn and tired. The lines indeed of vast responsibilities, intricate questions, and demands of life and death cut deeper than even upon his dark brown face. Again, his dark brown face, yet all the old goodness and tenderness, sadness and canny shrewdness underneath the furrows. All right, so this is says here from Specimen Days, Walt Whitman. So Walt Whitman actually wrote this a lot. The last reference of him being dark brown is from Walt Whitman as well. Just gonna go to some of his books real quick. This is one of them, Prose Works, 1892, Specimen Days, the one we just saw, just to verify, and it's right here again. I see very plainly Abraham Lincoln's dark brown face. All right, dark brown face. Says here, Abraham Lincoln biographies, 13 biographies edited by Golgotha Press. And they also quote it, says the entirely unornamental cortege arouses no sensation, only some curious stranger stops and gazes. I see very plainly Abraham Lincoln's dark brown face. Dark brown face. This book is Civil War Poetry and Prose by Walt Whitman, same person. And again, as it says here, I see very plainly Abraham Lincoln's dark brown face. Dark brown face. So real quick, this is Walt Whitman right here, supposedly. It says President Lincoln. So he was a poet. It seems that he knew Lincoln personally. It says the poet spent the next 10 years of his life here in the district, working in hospitals, writing. He even fostered a pleasant relationship with President Lincoln, passing by Whitman's house during his daily commute to and from White House. The two exchanged greetings, recorded his impressions of the president. Whitman wrote. So remember, this person saw him, he knew him personally. He says, I see the president almost every day, as I happen to live where he passes to or from his lodging out of town. He never sleeps at the White House during the head reason. So this person, Walt Whitman, all right, we're in this President Lincoln's cottage blog, He knew him personally. So when he's saying, I see very plainly Abraham Lincoln's dark brown face, he's clearly letting you know what he looks like. He's a person of color. He's a person that you would call a Negro. He's a person would be called today an African American. Yes, Abraham Lincoln, this person is describing him as.
Who was our first black president?
Well, Barack?
Get off the chair. Who was our first black president? Who's our
George
first black
Washington.
president? Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln was a Melungeon.
Wow.
He was part black, part white, and part Cherokee Indian.
Wow.
Yeah, you didn't know that, did you? He was a superhuman human being because
I don't know
he
how
was a
to spell
Melungeon.
it.
Melungeon. Melungeon.
Oh, there it is.
There it is. What does it
Okay.
say?
It says Melungeon ancestry of Abraham Lincoln.
What?
Really learning.
Strange things happen after
Jay,
You got that lady. I don't really know who she is. It must be something. I think that was Will Smith's daughter she was talking to or showing presenting the info to. They were shocked, right? So, she's correlating what we're reading so far, right? They're saying that he might have been a so-called ancestry of a so-called African American, right? That he might have been a person of color because he was a Melungeon, right? So what is a Melungeon? We know these are a tribal group of different people who mix, like Europeans with indigenous people, a lot of runaway supposed slaves. We all know these are indentured servants. A lot of these are Europeans, both white and black, and Indians, Aboriginal people who mix with, they're all mixed and became the Melungeons. All right. So we're in this book, The Melungeons, The Last Lost Tribe in America by Elizabeth Caldwell Hirschman. And in page 89 of this book, it says Abraham Lincoln, that Abraham Lincoln was of Melungeon descent was first suggested to my knowledge by Brent Kennedy. Kennedy comments that Lincoln's mother, Nancy Hanks, was in all likelihood of Melungeon heritage. Given several facts of her background, indeed, anyone who looks at photographs of Abraham Lincoln is no doubt struck by his distinctively Semitic features. The thick, coarse black hair. But when we look at these images of Abraham Lincoln, I don't see thick, coarse black hair. I see like this, a white person's hair, like very straight or, not thick at all. All right, and it says here, the dark skin. What dark skin? The dark skin, dark eyes, prominent nose, and equally prominent cheekbones. So I was quite comfortable with Brent Kennedy's assertion regarding Lincoln's maternal ancestry. So I'm in this book now. It's called Herndon's Lincoln, The True Story of a Great Life. Etiam in Minimus Major, The History and Personal Recollections of Abraham Lincoln by William H. Herndon. For 20 years, his friend and law partner. This was his friend. He knew him, Jesse William Week A.M., Volume 1. And this book is from 1889. So real quick, just want to show something very significant that Abraham Lincoln said to somebody. He asked him. All right, it says Samuel Haycraft, the clerk of the court in Hardin County, invited him to visit the scenes of his birth and boyhood, which led him to say this in a letter, June 8, 1860. And this is what Abraham Lincoln said. You suggest that a visit to the place of my nativity might be pleasant to me? Remember, he was an indentured servant by somebody somewhere, right? He didn't like that place. Indeed it would. But would it be safe? Would not the people lynch me? That reports reflecting on his origin and descent should arise in community in which he felt that his life was unsafe is by no means surprising. Abraham Lincoln, the grandfather of the president, emigrated to Jefferson County, Kentucky from Virginia about 1780, and from that time forward the former state became an important one in the history of the family, for it was destined to be born its most illustrious member. All right, so he was saying, you think I should go there? You don't think they're gonna lynch me? Why would they lynch him? Who were they lynching? Who were they lynching, suppose? Who did they tell us were lynching people? They were lynching so-called Negroes, right? That's what they told us in history. I never said that, hey, a group of black people lynched a white man, or a group of white people lynched a white man. Maybe sometimes, but it wasn't the main story, right? They were always told that there were so-called black people that was getting lynched. So why would Abraham Lincoln be scared to go get lynched where he grew up? Now I'll tell you why. We're in page 13 of the same book. And again, remember, we already got Nancy Hanks, his mom being dark-skinned. We're going to get the same thing over here. It says her skin was dark. Right? They're talking about Nancy Hanks, the mother of the president. At a very early age was taken from her mother Lucy. At a very early age was taken from her mother Lucy. Why? And afterwards married to Henry Sparrow, and then sent to live with her aunt and uncle, Thomas Betsy Sparrow. You see? It's weird. Why was she taken from her mom? Was she an indentured servant, Melungeon, Indian, and descendant? Right? She was what? Her skin is dark. She's dark. His mom is dark. His dad is dark skinned. He said he's dark skinned. So why would he be afraid to go to his hometown and get lynched? Because he's dark skinned. He's dark brown complexion. His mom is dark. I'll tell you another reason why he might be scared to get lynched. All right, we're in the book The Hidden Lincoln, from the letters and papers of William H. Herndon, Emmanuel Hertz. This is from 1940. We're on page 184 of this book, and it says there's a letter here from June 24th, 1887. Mr. Bartlett, my dear sir, right? They're writing to that person, and it seems by your friend W.H. Henderson, right? And he's writing about what Mr. Lincoln looks like. It says, you speak of Mr. Lincoln's fine physical nature, but to see and study the man, you would say that Mr. Lincoln's physical nature was comparatively low, coarse, and not fine and high. He seemed to have no blood in his frame. His flesh was dark. His flesh was dark. Darkness. All right, all this dark. Where's the pale? Again, they keep showing us these white pictures of Abraham Lincoln growing up. Every time we Google Lincoln, every time we try to look for him, even in these books that are describing him as dark complexion, they keep putting a white pale face Lincoln in the cover of the book, even though they're writing his flesh was dark. So why would he be afraid to get lynched? Because his flesh was dark. It says here, wrinkled and folded. It looked dry and leathery, tough and everlasting. His eyes were small and gray, head small and forehead receding. But when this great man was moved by some great or good feeling, by some idea of liberty or justice or right, then he seemed an inspired man. But his flesh was what? Dark. In the same book on page 361, down here says Josh C. Richardson's statement from, it says here, my father came to Spencer County, Indiana in 1828. It says Lincoln was tall, a raw-boned at 18. When 16 years of age, he was 6 feet high. He was so tall, right? He was somewhat bony and raw, dark-skinned. Dark-skinned. What does this mean? Oh, Kurimeo, that means pale. No, dark-skinned. Why do they keep showing us pale-faced images of Abraham Lincoln? And we're getting only accounts of him being dark-skinned from everybody. Dark-skinned, dark complexion, dark features, dark face, bronze, dark brown face, dark brown complexion, dark skin. He was quick and moved with energy. He never idled away his time. All right, so they're describing him here. We're gonna get one more in this book on page 412. We get down here, Lincoln, the individual, and they start describing him. Let's see what he says. It says, it is now the time to describe the person, Mr. Lincoln. He was about 6 feet 4 inches high, and when he left the city, was 51 years old, having good health and no gray hairs or but few on his head. He was thin, wiry, sinewy, I don't know how to say that, raw and big, heavy boned, thin through the breast to the back and narrow across the shoulders. Standing, he leaned forward and was what may be called stoop-shouldered, inclining to the consumptively built, his usual weight being about 160 or 80 pounds. His organization, rather his structure and functions, worked slowly. His blood had to run a long distance from his heart to the extremities of his frame. He was so long, right? His bones were long, he was tall, and his nerve force had to travel through dry ground a long distance before his muscles were obedient to his will. His organisms and structure were loose and leathery. His body was well shrunk, cadaverous, and shriveled, having very dark skin. Very dark skin. We're adding an adjective to this. We're not just saying he's dark skinned, he's very dark skinned. We're not talking about a tan, we're not talking about some pale faced dude who might have look a little Semitic. No, he is very dark skinned. They're describing the individual. They told you in the beginning of this. Say, let's get to his character. He is very dark skinned, dry and tough, wrinkled and lined, somewhat in flabby folds, dark hair, the man looking woe-struck. The whole man, body and mind, worked slowly, creakingly, and as if it needed oiling. Physically, he was very powerful man, lifting, as he said, with ease, 400 or 600 pounds. He was mad strong. You see, Abraham Lincoln was mad strong. He was just a little scrawny and bony and weird looking, but he was really strong. His mind was like his body, and blood worked slowly, but his body and mind functioned strongly through his blood and moved slowly. All right, so again, having what? Very dark skin, a very dark skin. Any questions? In this book now, it's called The Life of Abraham Lincoln, drawn from original sources and containing many speeches, letters, and telegrams. Hitherto unpublished by Ida M. Tarbell, Volume 1. This is from 1900. On page 360 of this book, it says, they noted his great height, his huge hands and feet, his peculiar languidness of limb, his shoulders drooped as he stood, giving his form a look of irresolution. His smooth-shaven face seemed of bronze as he listened to their message and amazed them by its ruggedness. The cheeks were sunken, the cheekbones high, the nose large, the mouth unsymmetrical, the underlip protruding a little. All right, so he's what? His face is what? Bronze. A bronze face. Bronze. What is the color of bronze? Here in the scheme of color website, we have shiny bronze color scheme. So shiny bronze, right? This is a different palettes. This is more like platinum, as it says here. As you can see, you know, showing the gray is actually platinum, but all the rest says, look, Philippine bronze. Look at that color. Bronze, right? Dark bronze. Here goes metallic bronze. And then bronze, metallic, right? All dark complexions, dark colors, right? We got another palette here. Scheme color says dark bronze, monochromatic color scheme, dark bronze. You see? All right, who does this resemble more? Is this white people right here? Let's go to the palette here too. Philippine bronze again, dark bronze, golden brown. Look at that. Chinese brown. So look at this, dark bronze, look at bronze. So again, his face, his shoven face seemed of bronze. He had a bronze face. So now we're in this book. It says here, the Lincoln Encyclopedia. All right, this is the Lincoln Encyclopedia, the spoken and written words of Abraham Lincoln, from his own words, people. All right, an encyclopedia of his own words, arranged for ready reference, compiled and edited by Arthur H. Shaw, with introduction by David C. Mearns, assistant librarian from the Library of Congress. This is from 1950. All right, an encyclopedia, the Lincoln Encyclopedia. Let's see what we find in here. And we're on page 190 of this book, of this encyclopedia, right? All right, so we're zoomed in into page 190, and it says here, the personal description of Abraham Lincoln, his own personal descriptions, right? We're in encyclopedia, Library of Congress. Pay attention, people. It says, perhaps you have forgotten me. Don't you remember a long black fellow who rode on horseback with you from Tremont to Springfield nearly 10 years ago, swimming our horses over the Machina on the trip? Well, I am that same old fellow. All right, so that was Abraham Lincoln writing to somebody, to Josephus Hewitt on February 13th, 1848, saying, do you remember, man? I'm the black dude. I'm the black fellow. Got another one here. Again, we have this already. Just want to verify. We got it from a different source and a verifiable source, right? It says, if any personal description of me is thought desirable, it may be said that I am in height 6 feet 4 inches, nearly lean in flesh, weighing an average 180 pounds, dark complexion. All right, again, dark complexion with coarse black hair and dark eyes. No other marks or brands recollected. Remember what that meant? That meant he was making fun that he used to be a slave and he ran away. He did it like an ad. All right, so now we finally get to this. I just wanted to show you all the different references. Now we're going to get the actual original autobiography of Abraham Lincoln. And again, they're going to put a pale-faced guy here. All right, but let me just zoom in so you can see. This is issued by the Americanization Department, Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States, reproduced with the permission of the heirs and descendants of Jesse W. Fell. All right, and again, this is the autobiography of Abraham Lincoln. I was born February 12, 1809. This is a collection of the Lincoln Financial Foundation collection, and this is very hard to read. All right, but I've already read it to you. This is the same one that we kept seeing where he's describing himself as dark complexion. So I just wanted you to see that this is real. This is right here. So again, this is the Autobiography of Abraham Lincoln, where he states he is of dark complexion. All right, so I'm going to try to outline where I see it again so you can see. So dark complexion right here. Let me circle it. Do you see that in green over here to the right? Dark complexion, right? These are the two things right here. You see the two things I'm circling? Dark complexion. Abraham Lincoln writing about himself with coarse black hair. Dark complexion. Right over here. And right over here, dark complexion. Authorized or notarized by David Davis. And who was David Davis? An American politician, a close associate of Abraham Lincoln. He was Supreme Court Justice and Senator during the antebellum American Civil Wars, post-wars. David Davis, United States jurist and politician. He's the one that verified this. He's the one that signed right here. David Davis. This is Abraham Lincoln's, again, autobiography. Abraham Lincoln was really dark complexion and had coarse hair, as he himself described. Now, crazy, right? Because I want to get into some other things here. We're almost done with this video, but look at this image right here. I'm going to explain this image right here. So this is property of the Abraham Lincoln Library and Museum. This is actually Abraham Lincoln, a depiction of Abraham Lincoln. Now, what do you notice right away? Let me just try to zoom out. What do you notice right away about this image? He looks like a Moor, right? He has the curly hair. He's almost depicted like a Moorish, right? Moorish. What's the background behind this image? It says here that in 1863, let me just zoom into the text. Caricature Adalbert Volk portrays Lincoln as Mokana, or 8th century Al-Mukana, whose name translates from the Arabic to the veiled. One, according to legend, Al-Mukana wore a veil to hide his magnificence from his followers. So Lincoln depicted as this guy who hid himself. What is that, subliminal? Is Lincoln hiding himself? Or is there a veil over Lincoln? Is this subliminal? Or as it is also said, to hide his baldness and loss of an eye. In this cartoon, Volk is making comment about Lincoln's ancestry based upon unfounded rumors of African descent. Really? Unfounded rumors. What are those rumors? That he's Melungeon, that he's of color, that he's swarthy, that he's dark complexion, dark skinned. Really? His ancestry. We got another one here. Under Lincoln's hat, 100 objects that tell the story of his life and legacy by Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library Foundation. And it says here that in 1862, engraving called Under the Veil by Adalbert Volk, which also depicts Lincoln once unveiled as a black man. Lincoln, a champion of the black race, was known by his adversaries as a black Republican. He was what? Black Republican. All right. I'm doing this video on purpose, and I got a lot of videos coming out so you guys can understand something. It's a future video I got working on about black Republicans, or wealthy black people who owned slaves, who had plantations. All right. Abraham Lincoln says here his adversaries referred to him as a black Republican, and it says here because he helped establish and was a member of the Republican Party, but not because of that. It's because he was dark-skinned. He was an actual black Republican. With the Granger Historical Picture Archive, and we got the same image here of Lincoln, right? And what does it say here as well? It says Lincoln caricature 1863 under the veil, caricature etching of President Abraham Lincoln by the pro-Confederate cartoonist Adalbert Volk, portraying the African ancestry then being attributed to Lincoln by unfounded rumors. Really? Oh, we know the truth now, because he himself called himself a dark complexion man, All right. Yesterday's papers, Confederate caricaturist Dr. Adalbert J. Volk, 1820 to 1912. And what does it say here? Under the veil, Mr. Lincoln is seen to be a Negro. When the veil is lifted, all right, we have lifted the veil, people. They're talking subliminal to us. These are Freemasons talking to us. We have lifted the veil. Welcome to the Twilight Zone. All right? Under the veil, Mr. Lincoln is seen to be a Negro. When the veil is lifted, we lifted the veil. He is a Negro. This is hitherto unpublished caricature by Aldebert Volk of Baltimore, made at the time of the Emancipation Proclamation. It represents the unfounded rumors then in circulation concerning the lineage of the president. The lineage, is he a Moor? Is his lineage Moor? Are these German Linkhorn? Are these indentured servant black German Moors? Did I tell you? Didn't I tell you? It's not just white Europeans that were coming. Also black Moors, Europeans. A lot of these people, like, you know, the Protestants, you know, the Huguenots, all these people, the German Palatines, the Irish, the black Irish. We're talking about the Cours of French. A lot of these people were Moors. All right, so they being subliminal here. And one more source here says, Drawing Swords, War in America, editorial cartoons by Lucy Shelton Caswell from the American Journalism Historians Association. We got the same image of Lincoln here. It's a little pixelated, but we already saw a good image. It says, Abraham Lincoln is depicted as a harem dancer with Negroid features and curly hair. Rumors circulated throughout the war that Lincoln had African-American ancestry. Rumors were circulating. Nah, this was truth. They knew he was of color, not African. Dodged the hijack. The vulture's head on symbolizes the bird of prey that feeds on carrion, and the ass's head on the medallion around his neck labeled the dancer of stupid fool. Volk's mockery of Abraham Lincoln as a woman of color with dubious morality would have been understood by his readers as a great insult to the president. So they picked him as a Moor. So yeah, it's all really crazy what we're learning here, right? What they're telling us, you know, they keep telling us and depicting him as a Negro, describing him as dark featured. He himself described himself as dark complexion. We have this other depiction here. This is a little more modern. Somebody painted it, obviously, but it says Abraham Africanus the First. Abraham Africanus the First. Where are they getting this from? Well, they're getting it from here. It says Abraham Africanus the First, his secret life as revealed under the mesmeric influence mysteries of the White House. This is from 1864 by John F. Feeks and Company, Alexander Del Mar. Let me just zoom into this. You know, I'm zoomed in, but they're going to tell us that in history they were saying, calling him African, or depicting him as a Moor, or as an N-word lover, right? A Negro lover, right? But truth is that he was dark skinned, he was a Negro, and that's, you know, they knew. It's basically just making fun of him and criticizing him. And, you know, Africanus #1. Look at this. I mean, you guys can read it on your own. It's there in the archives. But I just want you to see that there's reasons, there's meanings behind this. They're calling him Africanus, Abraham Africanus. Abraham Africanus, all right? This is another book. It's called The Lincoln Catechism, or Catechism, wherein the eccentricities and beauties of despotism are fully set forth. A guide to the presidential election of 1864 by J.F. Feeks, publisher, right? So, as you can see, they're going to always tell us, well, this because he was helping the blacks. Or really, was it just blacks, so-called blacks in indentured servitude? We know that's not true. There was also white people being freed. It wasn't just about black people being freed. They're letting you know, they're making fun of him right here because he was dark-skinned. Remember, he described himself like that. Abraham Africanus the First. Look at this. They just make fun of him all over the place. They're depicting him as a Negro and everything. But there's a reason behind that. What is Congress? A body organized for the purpose of taxing the people to buy Negroes and to make laws to protect the president from being punished for his crimes. So they're making fun of him, all right? They're going to say that everything deals with him putting black people or Negroes on the office. And it would make sense because if he's dark-skinned, all the Republicans are dark-skinned, and he's a Republican, he would have other Republicans in the office. And if they are dark-skinned, then, well, that's what happens, right? So it would happen. In this book, Abraham Lincoln, A Life, Volume 1, Michael Burlingame, right? This is why they're telling us, because they were making fun of him because he was helping black, so-called black people. And this is why they were calling him so-called Negro, right? Because he was helping Negroes. But that's not the reason. It says here, look what it says here. It says, for the choice of Lincoln, when nominating a rail splitter for the presidency, they were really resolved that they saw a Naga in the fence, a Naga in the fence, a N-word in the fence. They see who? Lincoln, a Naga in the fence. The Illinois State Register claimed that if Lincoln won, we shall have the Naga at the polls, the Naga on our juries, the Naga in the legislature. they were so afraid that these black Republicans were going to take power, and they did probably, because the most Republicans were black. I'm trying to tell you, and I'm going to show you the proof of this. I hope you believe me after all these videos that I got, that you know I'm serious when I say I got the proof, and I'm going to show you guys. So just have that ready. All right, they're always telling us that they made fun of him because, you know, blah 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 blah. No, he was a dark-skinned person. I just want to show you something now real quick. We're in the Oxford English Dictionary, right? And for the N-word, the Naga, right? We're gonna go down to a specific part. But first, I want to remind everybody what's in here. Now, the N-word is also used for what? A dark-skinned person of any origin, not just African, of any origin. In early U.S. use, usually with reference to who? American Indians. American Indians were called what? The N-word, right? The Naga. American Indians were called the Nagas. The N-word. Now we have a reference here to Abraham Lincoln. Now it says 1861, A.G. Frick, in 415 in Holster, and he wrote a book. It said, "Dear Mr. Lincoln, Abe Lincoln, God damn you, you are nothing but a goddamn black Naga." What? That's very descriptive, right? 1861, Oxford Dictionary. Somebody calling Abraham Lincoln a black Naga. And this is the book, Dear Mr. Lincoln, Letters to the President, edited by Harold Holzer. It says here, vile threats to the black Naga, or the N-word, February 14th, 1861. Sir, Mr. Abe Lincoln, if you don't resign, we're going to put a spider in your dumpling and play the devil with you. God almighty, goddamn subtle or of a itch, you know, go to, you know, and suck my, you know, call my bollocks, you uncle, goddamn fool, and goddamn Abe Lincoln, who will like you, goddamn you. Excuse me for using such hard words with your, but you need it. You are nothing but a goddamn black Naga. Yours and Mr. A.G. Frick, Tennessee, Missouri, Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, and Arkansas is going to succeed. Glory be to God on high. It says this letter, never before published in this entirely, was discovered in the files of the Chicago Historical Society. The Chicago Historical Society is holding this. Somebody calling him a black Naga. All right. We got another book here, Lincoln President-elect Abraham Lincoln, The Great Secession, Winter 1860, same author. And again, he's repeating it, what he called him. Again, goddamn Abe Lincoln, you are nothing but a goddamn black Naga. Such threats had become all too common, testifying later that his boss mailbag was infested with brutal and vulgar menace. So everybody was calling him that. All right? Says here, The Battles That Made Abraham Lincoln, How Lincoln Mastered His Enemies by Larry Tagg. And they're gonna again reference it. Abe Lincoln, you're nothing but a goddamn black Naga. All right? It's starting to become official. One more, just in case, Edinburgh Companion to 19th Century American Letters and Letter Writing, edited by Celeste Mary Burney. And it says here again, Abe Lincoln, who will like you. Goddamn, you accuse me for using such hard words, but you need it. You are just nothing but a goddamn black Naga. All right? Chicago Historical Society. So I found this. I also want to get into this real quick, just to mention it. I thought it was interesting. And hey, you know how they said earlier that he re-identified himself. He remade his image. Remember that? So this book says Photography and Cultural History by Mary Warner Marion. And right here we have Matthew Brady's famous photograph of Abraham Lincoln. And this is Matthew Brady right here. This dude right here. Very weird looking dude. All right, it says Matthew Brady's famous photograph of Abraham Lincoln was taken on the day of 1860, dodged a hijack. Does this look like dark complexion or very dark coarse hair, black coarse hair? No, it doesn't. It says it was taken on the day 1860 when he gave an address in New York at Copper Union. Brady sold prints of the photograph and it was reproduced in newspapers and magazines. Most people had never seen Lincoln. Again, this is this is a print. They're talking about that they had never seen him, but then they saw this print, this photo print. They had never seen Lincoln, but rumors of his physical ugliness. Were they talking about him being Negro? Remember, there was rumors of him being of African descent, right? Does that fit in with this? These rumors of physical ugliness were rife during his presidential campaign. The Democrat opposition sang a song at rallies that we beg and pray you, don't for God's sakes show his picture. Oh man, Brady distracted attention from Lincoln's gangliness by directing light to his face. What? Light? They talking about light, or they mean making his face lighter? Light to his face. He posed the future president in statesmanlike attitude and took care that he curled his fingers, especially of his right hand, so that they would not appear too long and large. Lincoln credited Brady for part of his success. Again, Lincoln credited Brady for remaking him. Part of his success. Listen to the subliminals, remarking that Brady and the Copper Institute made me president. The Copper Institute made me president. Copper-colored tribes made me president. By 1864, Brady and his firm had created more than 30 photographs, again, keyword, created, subliminal people, created more than 30 photographs of Lincoln, who himself sat for dozens of photographs, one of which was later used for Lincoln's head penny, and another of which was the source for Lincoln's image on the $5 bill. We're in another website here, says the great lengths taken to make Abraham Lincoln look good in portraits. What? One famous image of the president features a body that isn't his. That's not Abraham Lincoln, people. Look at this. That's the dude, the photographer. Brady. Remember, he created the images. Look at the checkered floor, the Freemasonic floor. This is not Lincoln. They just told you right there, it's not him. That's not his body. Body snatchers, remember. Print of Lincoln versus print of Calhoun engraven. Photos, left Library of Congress. It says Abraham Lincoln had a problem during the 1860 campaign as a Republican candidate for the American presidency in an era after the birth of photograph, but before its widespread dissemination in the media. Many of the country's citizens could only guess at what he looked like. They didn't know what he looked like. You see what I'm trying to tell you here, what I'm showing you here? In general, remember, this is not no internet, no social media, nothing going around where people can be like, yeah, I saw Abraham Lincoln, I know what he looks like. Only photographs, images. They were creating icons. Remember, iconoclasm, icons. Rumors of his ugliness proliferated. Rumors of his ugliness. They're talking about he was a Negro, an African. Remember Africanus? Rumors that he was an African ancestry or African American of dark complexion. The North Carolina newspaper, the New Bern Weekly Progress, wrote that Lincoln was coarse, vulgar, and uneducated, while the Houston Telegraph opined that he was the leanest, lankiest, most ungainly mass of legs, arms, and hedgeful face ever strung upon a single frame. He has most unwarrantably abused the privilege which all politicians have of being ugly. Man, they're making fun of him, right? So they had to create an image of him. One woman, Mary Boykin, claimed Lincoln was a grotesque appearance, the kind who are always at the corner store sitting on boxes, whittling sticks and telling stories as funny as they are vulgar. In fact, many Democrats sang an anti-Lincoln rally crying that concluded, "We beg and pray you don't for God's sake show his picture." You see what I'm saying? Why they didn't want to show his picture? There's nothing wrong with these pictures they made right here. Look at this picture. What's wrong with this picture? This is the created one after, right? So what's wrong with the original pictures? What's wrong with them? Was he a black man? So-called black man? Please don't show. They're like, no, don't show. For God's sake, don't show a Negro as president. Though the rumors of Lincoln's ugliness stayed mostly within Democratic circles, Lincoln was not anxious to let the idea spread. So he turned to Matthew Brady, a well-known photographer with a studio on Pennsylvania Avenue. In many ways, Brady was perfect. Though Brady himself had bad vision and did not take many of his own photos, he conceptualized image, arranged the sitters, and oversaw the production of pictures. Now, people, I do Photoshop, so this sounds like early Photoshop to me. People who like did photo magic, like worked and did things with the negatives. He conceptualized images. His photographer conceptualized Abraham Lincoln's images. All right, what are we hearing here? Plus, according to the New York Times, Brady was not averse to certain forms of retouching. He retouched Abraham Lincoln's images. Are you understanding what I'm saying? Showing you guys here, right? Are you understanding? Look at this. That's not Abraham Lincoln, is what I'm letting you know. Dodge the hijack. This is propaganda. This is how they do us today with marketing and media and all that. Whitewashing, right? Whitewashing. Dodge the hijack. Wake up. All right, so as we look at this final image again of Abraham Lincoln as a Moor, we've come to the end of this presentation on the true characteristics of Abraham Lincoln and his past as a slave, indentured servant. After all this information, we can say it's clear someone is lying to us and have lied to us about, American history and about who people really were. I know you guys have seen other YouTubers or social media sites put in this specific image of Abraham Lincoln as a black man, but they never had anything solid to show that he actually was. Whether this person right here you're looking at is Abraham Lincoln or not, I don't know. But trust me, I'm digging on who this person can be, and one day we may know. Could this be the shriveled, dark-skinned man described by many and by Abraham Lincoln himself? Well, now it's up to everyone to disprove he's not, because history is clearly telling us that Abraham Lincoln was a colored man. That today, he would be called an African American. So I hope that you liked this video and you found it informative. I have much more coming on indentured servitude, the Black Republicans, and all the references to wealthy plantation slave-owning people of color that were in existence before the 1860s. So thank you once again for tuning in. May the Most High bless and protect you. May the Great Spirit give you wisdom. Hawah!
Do the trick with the Lincoln letter.
The Lincoln what?
The letter from Abraham Lincoln.
President Abraham Lincoln?
Yes. When's your pen pal?
With the president.
I'm sorry, I heard that somebody in your party had a letter from Abraham Lincoln. I assumed it was you.
Not him. Black fella in the stable.
A nigger? In the stable has a letter from Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah.
The nigger in the stable has a letter from Abraham Lincoln.